For the next set of frameworks that we can take advantage of for front-end development in Liferay, we're going to go ahead and talk about JavaScript. Okay. Now there's a lot of things that we can do with JavaScript. As we'll see in our theme module exercise in the third chapter of these videos, we'll just use some simple JavaScript then and look at how we can implement that through our themes. But for those of you guys who do love adding JavaScript, or if you have any business requirements that require you to use JavaScript, there are a number of different examples or different frameworks rather that we can use. Okay, so let's take a look at what options we have for just adding JavaScript to the platform before we look at what actual frameworks we have available to us. Okay. All right, so first we can add JavaScript, of course, through our themes. Okay, as we'll talk about in the third chapter, themes are comprised of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, and some configuration. Okay, so we can, of course, add JavaScript through our themes, and that's going to be global JavaScript that's loaded on every page. Okay, we can also add JavaScript to the platform through templates as well as fragments. So I mentioned earlier, templates are primarily using FreeMarker, but you can also add CSS and JavaScript. Okay, fragments allow you specifically to do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so you have the options there as well. Okay, you can add single-page applications using Senna.js. This is something we'll talk about a little bit later on, but that's already built into Liferay, so you can actually do some of those things and use some of those features right out of the box. And we'll get back to that in the last section of these videos. Okay, you can use JavaScript in custom application modules. Okay, and we'll also talk about that a little bit later on, but you can build some modules using some front-end technologies like React or Angular. And you can use JavaScript in there as well. All right, so those are the ways in which we can add JavaScript to the platform. Now let's go ahead and look at what features we have available to us for JavaScript. First of all, you can add ECMAScript to the platform by basically having .es.js files. Okay, this could be done again through the theme. This could be done through some of our other modules as well, and we'll take a look at how you can actually do this a little bit later on. Okay, but you do have these available, and these are available to us through a Liferay specific framework called Metal.js. Okay, so there are 3 JavaScript frameworks that we have in Liferay out of the box. Okay, you can of course use just traditional JavaScript. You can add, as developers, whatever JavaScript frameworks you'd like to add if you'd like to use those and add that on. Okay. But out of the box, you have advantage of a Liferay specific framework called Metal.js, Lodash, as well as jQuery. So let me talk a little bit about Metal.js. Okay, Metal.js is a JavaScript framework that is built in Liferay. And what this does is it basically allows us to take advantage of, like I said, ECMAScript. It also allows us to take advantage of some other JavaScript templating languages, so JSX and Soy, to build some of our applications. Okay, so we built this for internal purposes. This is not something that we're necessarily recommending using, but it is something that you can use. If you are interested in more details about Metal.js, we do have some documentation on this as well, so feel free to take a look at the Metal.js documentation. All right, of course, developers can also add their own third-party JavaScript libraries to the platform as well. One note I'm going to make here is if you do add another library to the platform, when you build, you'll just need to pay attention and be careful with overhead. You don't want to obviously load in too many libraries. That could be a lot of overhead. That can slow things down. So be careful with this, but it is something that you can do. Okay. So there are 3 things that we can do here. We can add owned libraries, browser-loaded third-party libraries, as well as hosted libraries. Okay, and you can see the ways in which you can do this here. And again, for those of you who are interested in doing this, we're not going to go into too much detail because we're just going to go ahead and use some semantic JavaScript for our examples. But there is more documentation on this as well. So you guys can go ahead and take a look at our documentation on how to add third-party JavaScript libraries. All right, so to recap this section, what we've talked about here is we can add JavaScript through our global modules, okay, as well as our templates and fragments. Okay, and what we have out of the box, the frameworks we have out of the box available for us are Metal.js, Lodash, and jQuery. Okay, and again, Metal.js is something that was built in Liferay for Liferay, so it's something that you can take advantage of, but it's not something that we are necessarily recommending you using. You can take advantage of any of these frameworks that are available out of the box, or you can add on your own framework as well within the build process. Okay, for our examples, we'll just use some semantic JavaScript, but we will look at some other examples of how to, for example, use ECMAScript later on. Okay, all right. So for the next section, the last section here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and talk about FreeMarker. All right, so stay tuned for the next video.